Listen, this protects money, not feelings. If you're thinking about buying a house without understanding what you're actually buying, you're not making a life decision. You're taking a leveraged rate trade. I've seen what happens to people who confuse shelter with an investment when the cycle turns. Most buyers think they're purchasing a home. What they're really purchasing is a balance sheet, a long stream of fixed obligations tied to a financing instrument most people don't understand, priced off a bond market they never monitor, in a market that becomes illiquid precisely when they most want flexibility. That's the real estate truth. And until you understand it, you shouldn't buy. People misunderstand housing because they frame it emotionally. They frame it as stability, identity, achievement. That's not how capital sees it. Capital sees housing as an asset with carrying costs, taxes, maintenance, transaction friction, and most importantly, financing risk. And financing risk is what turns home ownership into a wealth builder for some and a long financial hostage situation for others. Here's the popular lie buyers repeat to themselves. I'm throwing money away on rent. That's an amateur statement. Rent is not throwing money away. Rent is the price of flexibility and the price of not taking leverage risk. Sometimes renting is expensive. Sometimes owning is expensive. But only one of them can trap you with a refinancing event, a job change, and a frozen market at the same time. The goal is not to own. The goal is to control your financial outcomes. I've watched multiple housing phases play out. In easy money regimes, people overpay because monthly payments feel cheap and credit is generous. They don't buy based on price. They buy based on payment. Then rates rise, affordability collapses, transaction volume freezes, and suddenly that same buyer is stuck with a house they can't easily sell and a payment that dictates their life choices. This is why I don't accept "I'll refinance later" as a plan. That sentence has destroyed more household balance sheets than any market headline. Now I'll give you the framework I use: cold, mechanical, and designed to prevent regret. First, understand what housing is in financial terms. A house is a consumption asset with an embedded leveraged investment. You consume shelter. You also take a leveraged position in a local real estate market funded by debt. If you can't separate those two realities, you will make poor decisions. Second, understand what a mortgage is. A mortgage is not a monthly payment. A mortgage is a long-duration liability priced off long-term rates. And long-term rates are not controlled directly by your optimism. They are influenced by inflation expectations, fiscal supply, and bond market demand. That's why people waiting for a small policy change to magically fix housing affordability often get disappointed. Because mortgages don't price off hope, they price off the term structure of interest rates. Even Kevin O'Leary has pointed out that mortgages are tied to longer-term rates, and rate cuts don't automatically translate into mortgage relief. Third, accept the real cost stack. The purchase price is not the cost. The cost is the interest cost over time, property taxes, insurance, maintenance and CapEx, opportunity cost of your down payment, transaction costs when you buy and when you sell, and the time value of your flexibility. Most buyers do not calculate these. They focus on the monthly payment and ignore the rest. That is blind leverage. Now I'll define the real estate truth in one sentence, because I want it to be impossible to misunderstand. If the mortgage is more than you can comfortably carry through a recession, you don't own the house. The house owns you. Not emotionally, mathematically. When your housing cost consumes too much of your after-tax cash flow, you turn one variable, housing, into the controlling variable of your entire financial life. That's the trap. O'Leary has expressed this in a simplified rule. Keep the mortgage payment to roughly 1/3 of after-tax income. I'll go further. The real test is not whether you can pay it today. The test is whether you can pay it when something goes wrong. Because something always goes wrong, eventually. Now we go deeper, step by step, like an allocator. The first risk you must understand is interest rate risk. In housing, rate risk shows up in three ways. 1. Affordability. When rates rise, a given monthly payment buys less house. That compresses demand. 2. Liquidity. When rates rise, existing homeowners with low fixed mortgages become reluctant sellers. Inventory can stay low even while demand falls. That creates a frozen market, high prices, low transactions. 3. Valuation sensitivity. Real estate is priced like a long-duration asset when people buy based on payment. That means small changes in rates can drive large changes in what buyers can pay. If you're buying at a time when rates are elevated and you assume rates will fall, be honest, that's a bet. It might work, But it is not a guarantee, and it is not the only variable that matters. If inflation stays sticky or fiscal issuance pushes long rates higher, your refinance fantasy becomes irrelevant. The second risk is employment and income risk. A mortgage is a fixed obligation. Your income is not a fixed asset. Even if you have a stable job, cycles happen. If your payment requires perfect continuity of income, then your home is not a stabilizer. It's a destabilizer. This is why I like conservative housing decisions for high earners as much as for anyone else. High income often creates high fixed costs. High fixed costs create fragility. Fragility is what destroys wealth. The third risk is transaction friction and forced timing. Real estate is illiquid. It's expensive to buy. It's expensive to sell. And it becomes most illiquid at the exact moment you'd like to exit. If you're buying a house, you need to pre-commit to a holding period that makes sense. If you think you might need to move in 2 or 3 years, you're not buying a home. You're buying transaction costs plus market timing risk. The fourth risk is maintenance reality. Maintenance is not an optional expense. It's deferred liability. A roof does not care about your cash flow. A sewer line does not negotiate. A property is a machine that slowly breaks. If you don't budget for that, you will fund it with credit, and then you've turned a safe asset into a leveraged consumer purchase. The fifth risk is concentration. For most households, the house becomes their largest single asset. That's not diversification. That's concentration in one location, one market, one tax regime, and one policy environment. Again, that can be fine if you size it correctly relative to your net worth and liquidity. But if you're buying a house that consumes most of your capital and leaves you with thin liquidity, you're not building wealth. You're building a brittle balance sheet. Now let's address the difference between buying a home and investing in real estate, because people blur this line. If you're buying a primary residence, treat it primarily as a lifestyle asset with a financing structure. That means the goal is stability, not maximum return. You do not stretch for a primary residence. Stretching is what turns a house into a risk event. If you're investing in real estate, then it needs to be underwritten like a business. You need to know the cap rate, the debt service coverage, the vacancy assumptions, the repair reserve, and the exit liquidity. If you can't underwrite it like a business, then you shouldn't call it an investment. You're speculating on appreciation, and appreciation is not a plan. It's a benefit if it happens. Now I'm going to speak to you directly, because some of you are making the same mistake I've seen for decades. If you are buying because you feel pressure, you are buying for the wrong reason. If you are buying because you think prices can only go up, you are buying with the wrong model. If you are buying because you think you can refinance later, you are buying with a hope-based strategy. Hope is not a risk management tool. Here is the practical rule set I would use before buying any house. 1. Pass the payment test under stress. Not today's income, stress income. Assume your household income drops. Assume expenses rise. Assume you cannot sell quickly. If the payment is still comfortable, proceed. If it's tight, you stop. 2. Pre-fund the invisible costs. Down payment is not enough. You need reserves for maintenance and repairs. You need reserves for job interruption. If buying the house drains your liquidity, you are not buying stability. You are buying a new vulnerability. 3. Choose financing that aligns with your risk tolerance. Most people choose mortgages based on the lowest initial payment. That's how they end up with structures that blow up later. O'Leary has warned that the wrong type of mortgage can become a money trap. You don't optimize for minimum payment. You optimize for survivability. 4. Don't confuse house quality with deal quality. A beautiful house at a bad price is a bad deal. A mediocre house at a good price can be an excellent decision. Price is not a detail. Price is the risk. 5. Respect the opportunity cost of the down payment. A down payment is capital. Capital has alternatives. If you put a large amount into a house, you are choosing to allocate to that asset instead of liquid markets. That's fine, but it has to be intentional. If you're sacrificing your investable portfolio to buy more house, understand the trade. You're exchanging compounding liquidity for consumption stability. Again, sometimes that is rational, but not when it breaks your financial structure. Now, counterarguments. People will say, rent is dead money. No, rent buys flexibility and limits downside. In certain regimes, especially when housing is overpriced relative to incomes and financing is expensive, renting can be the more rational decision. People will say, but my home will appreciate. It might, but appreciation is not guaranteed. And even if it occurs, it may not beat the combined cost of interest, taxes, insurance, maintenance, and opportunity cost. And you can't spend appreciation unless you sell or borrow against it. Selling is friction, borrowing is leverage. So don't treat appreciation like a paycheck. People will say, rates will come down, I'll refinance. Maybe, but mortgage rates are tied to longer-term rates, and rate cuts do not automatically deliver affordability relief in the way buyers hope. Yahoo Finance. And even if rates fall, your ability to refinance depends on credit conditions, your income, your home's value, and bank standards at that time. Those are not controllable variables. A plan that relies on uncontrollable variables is not a plan. Now, the forward-looking insight. The housing market is not just about supply and demand. It's about credit. Housing is a credit product wrapped around shelter. As long as credit remains expensive or constrained, affordability remains pressured. That doesn't mean prices must collapse everywhere. It means the market becomes segmented. Prime locations with strong incomes may remain firm. Overbuilt or speculative areas can weaken. Transaction volume can stay low. And people who bought at the edge, high payment, low reserves, will be forced into bad decisions if their life circumstances change. If you ignore the real estate truth and buy based on emotion, you're setting yourself up for a narrow path. Everything has to go right. Income has to stay stable. Rates have to cooperate. Repairs have to be minimal. The local market has to remain liquid. That is not how cycles work. Cycles test you where you assumed you were safe. If you understand the truth, you buy differently. You buy less house than you can afford on paper. You keep reserves. You choose survivable financing. You treat the home as a stability tool, not as a wealth machine. And then you build wealth in liquid, productive assets that compound without trapping you. That's the separation. That's how disciplined capital behaves. Now, if you want more analysis like this, cold, clear, and built around survivability, subscribe. Not for reassurance, for precision. And watch the next breakdown, because I'm going to explain the specific conditions that make renting the superior decision, even for high earners, and the exact mortgage structures I consider unacceptable when the cycle is uncertain. If you have capital at stake, you don't need optimism, you need rules.